I never should have opened that door on New Year's Eve. Looking back, the warning signs were all there. The way Bailey's ears perked up just before the doorbell rang, the strange glint in the woman's eyes when she smiled, and how quickly she disappeared upstairs. But when you're alone in someone else's house, your judgment can get cloudy. I'm Mike, 35, and I was dog-sitting for my friend Alex that weekend. He's younger, 27, and had plans to celebrate New Year's Eve in the city. I was perfectly content making some extra cash while having a quiet night in with his dog Bailey, a peculiarly small husky mix with the most penetrating blue eyes I'd ever seen on a dog. The house was peaceful that evening. Outside, a light dusting of snow had begun to fall, visible through the living room window where I sat with my laptop. Bailey lay curled up by my feet, her breath creating a gentle rhythm that almost lulled me to sleep. The wall clock ticked away, marking time until my girlfriend Trisha would arrive after her late shift. The doorbell shattered that piece around 9 p.m. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could make out a feminine silhouette. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with a woman in her early 30s, wearing a dark hoodie and clutching a jacket in her arms. Her smile seemed practiced, rehearsed. "Hi," she said, her voice carrying an unsettling sweetness. "I'm Alex's girlfriend. I left something here that I really need to grab." That's when Bailey, usually so quiet and well-behaved, let out a low whimper. I should have listened to that warning. Instead, I let her in. She knew exactly where she was going, heading straight upstairs to Alex's room. The sound of her footsteps on the wooden stairs echoed through the house, each step deliberate and measured. She left the door slightly ajar, and for what felt like an eternity, I could hear rustling sounds from above. When she finally came down, she was still holding that same jacket, nothing else. Her smile had changed somehow. There was something almost predatory about it now. "How long have you two been dating?" I asked, trying to make conversation. Her laugh sent chills down my spine. "Too long," she said, and then she was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of her perfume and an overwhelming sense of unease. What happened next still haunts me. A frantic phone call to Alex, discovering he had no girlfriend. The late night knocking at the door. The footsteps in the hallway. Bailey's warning howls. The whispered voices outside the bedroom door, and that same woman's voice asking Alex. We were trapped in that spare bedroom, Trisha and I, listening to multiple sets of footsteps creeping through the house. They had a key stolen earlier by that woman who claimed to be Alex's girlfriend. Their intentions that night remain unclear, but the thought of what might have happened if we hadn't locked that bedroom door still keeps me awake at night. The police came, but they were already gone. The front door left wide open, letting in the bitter winter air. Bailey never left my side that night, her ears constantly alert, her eyes fixed on that bedroom door. Alex later told me the full story behind that woman, but that's his tale to tell. All I'll say is that some people wear masks so convincing, you never see the monster underneath until it's too late. Even now, a year later, whenever I hear a doorbell ring at night, I think of that woman's practiced smile and Bailey's warning whimper. So New Year's Eves mark new beginnings. That one taught me that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who know exactly how to play human. The security cameras failed that night. The doorman was gone. Even the usually reliable hallway lights seemed dimmer than usual. Looking back, it was as if everything that made our luxury penthouse feel safe had been stripped away, leaving us exposed on that bitter New Year's Eve. My husband and I had just returned from celebrating with friends downtown. The night was brutally cold, the kind that makes your bones ache. My feet were throbbing from hours in heels, and all I could think about was getting into our corner suite on the 7th floor. We lived in what was arguably the best apartment in the building, a penthouse with restricted floor access, 2 layers of security doors, and usually a doorman to greet residents. The lobby felt different that night. The fluorescent light above the mailboxes flickered erratically, casting strange shadows across the marble floor. It was 2 a.m., and the usual ambient sounds of the building were replaced by an oppressive silence. The elevator ride felt longer than usual, each floor passing with a soft ding that seemed to echo forever in the empty shaft. When the doors finally opened on our floor, that's when everything changed. She was there in the hallway, A figure that shouldn't have been there, couldn't have been there. At first glance, she looked like a drunk partygoer who had somehow wandered onto our restricted floor. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Her hair was matted and wild, hanging in dark angles that obscured her face. She wore what might have once been an elegant black lace dress, now torn and tattered. Her bare feet made wet sounds against the carpeted floor as she shuffled along, trailing her fingers across the walls. The sound she made, it wasn't quite humming, wasn't quite growling. It was something in between, something that made my skin crawl. We stood frozen by the elevator, watching as she moved from door to door, pressing her face against each peephole. When she reached Tilly's door, my heart stopped. So we told Tilly, who baked us cookies, and needed help with her smoking toaster. The thought of this thing had heard or made something snap inside me. "Excuse me, are you alright?" My voice sounded small in the hallway. The woman's reaction was immediate and horrifying. She crumpled to the floor like a marionette with cut strings, her body contorting unnaturally. Then came the laugh, a soft, menacing sound that grew into something inhuman. When she stood up, it wasn't a fluid movement of a person standing. It was jerky, wrong, like someone learning to use their body for the first time. The cackling grew louder, mixing with that guttural growl until it filled the entire hallway. You couldn't reach our door without passing her. We were trapped. Then she saw our door. The change was instant. Her head snapped toward it with impossible speed. The screaming started. Her fists pounded against our door with such force that I thought she'd break through. When my husband called out to her, she dropped to all fours and began crawling toward us, fast to fast. That's when I saw her face, those black, empty eyes in her mouth. God, her mouth was stained black like she'd been drinking ink. The sound she made. It was like something was stuck in her throat, something trying to get out. We ran. Abandoned our heels and ran down the emergency stairs, our hearts pounding so hard we couldn't hear if she was following. 10 minutes later, when we finally gathered the courage to return, she was gone. The hallway was empty, as if nothing had happened. The landlord checked the security footage the next day, but the cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned due to the cold. We moved out a year later, but I still think about that night, about what we really saw in that hallway. Sometimes late at night, I hear that laugh again in my dreams. That horrible mixture of cackling and growling. And I wonder, if the cameras hadn't malfunctioned, what would they have shown? A drunk woman in a torn dress? Or something else entirely, something that just wore the shape of a woman, trying its best to pass as human in our hallway that New Year's Eve? New Year's Eve 2020. The year everyone wanted to forget. We were at Logan's house trying to drink away the memories of lockdowns and losses, desperate to believe that midnight would somehow make everything better. None of us expected what happened in that basement. The party started like any other. Logan's parents were away, and he'd invited our closest friends plus some others I didn't know. Music thumped through the house, drinks flowed, and at midnight we all shouted Happy New Year. Like we could scream away the darkness of the past year. As the night wore on, people gradually filtered out to other parties or stumbled home in Ubers. The music got softer, conversations more intimate, until finally it was just Logan, Cody, and me. The house felt different than quieter, but not peaceful. It was that strange hour between late night and early morning when the world feels thin, like reality might tear if you pull at it too hard. That's when we first heard it. At first it was just a whisper of sound, easy to dismiss. Creak. Silence. Creak. Silence. Regular as a heartbeat. Logan blamed the fridge. You know how appliances make those weird settling noises at night. But as the sound continued, something about its rhythm felt deliberate. Intentional. Cody was already half asleep on the couch, the gentle rise and fall of his chest contrasting with that persistent creaking from somewhere below. Logan and I exchanged glances, both of us knowing we had to check it out. The basement door loomed before us, dark and uninviting. When Logan opened it, the creaking became clearer, echoing up the stairs. Each sound was like fingernails on the edge of my consciousness, making my skin prickle. "Yo, who's down there?" Logan called out, his voice slightly slurred from the alcohol. The creaking stopped immediately. The silence that followed was worse somehow, heavy, expectant. We grabbed kitchen knives, though looking back, we were probably too drunk to use them without hurting ourselves. The basement stairs creaked under our feet as we descended, each step taking us further from the comfort of the well-lit kitchen above. The basement was a cluttered space filled with old furniture and forgotten memories. Our phones' flashlights cast strange shadows across the walls, making ordinary objects look menacing. A musty smell hung in the air, the kind that speaks of age and abandonment. That's when I saw it, the rocking chair. It sat in the corner, a piece of Logan's family history. It had belonged to his grandmother, kept more for sentiment than use after she passed. Something about it drew me closer. I approached the chair, my heartbeat drowning out everything else. The wood was smooth from years of use, worn in places where hands had gripped the arms. I sat down, the old springs groaning under my weight, and gave a gentle push. Creak. Silence. Creak. Silence. The exact same sound we'd heard from upstairs. Logan and I locked eyes, and in that moment, every hair on my body stood on end. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. We ran up those stairs faster than I've ever moved in my life, slamming the door behind us. Later, we tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had been down there and slipped out while we were upstairs. Maybe the house was settling. Maybe we were just drunk. But we both knew what we'd heard, that chair had been rocking by itself, keeping time to some rhythm we couldn't understand. Logan kept that basement door locked until his parents returned days later. He never told them what happened. How do you explain something like that? How do you tell someone that their mother's rocking chair still moves in the night, as if someone's sitting there, rocking back and forth, watching, waiting? I've been to plenty of parties since then, but I've never experienced anything like that night. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark and everything is quiet, I hear it again in my mind, that slow, deliberate creaking. And I wonder if somewhere in that basement, that chair is still rocking, keeping time for someone we can't see. The firework exploded overhead in a burst of red and gold, illuminating something in the tree line that shouldn't have been there. Something tall. Something wrong. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We were 6 friends camping in Acadia National Park, Maine on New Year's Eve 2017. The trip had been months in the planning, our chance to ring in the new year away from the usual parties and crowds. Just us, nature, and enough tequila to keep us warm in the winter air. We set up our 3 tents along the riverbank, the water's gentle gurgle providing a constant backdrop to our laughter. The portable barbecue and campfire created a cozy circle of warmth and light against the encroaching darkness of the forest. Our battery-powered speaker pumped out music, and the tequila flowed freely. Everything felt perfect. Until it didn't. The first warning came from Mike. He suddenly held up his hand, signaling us to quiet down. "Listen," he said, lowering the music. At first, all I could hear was the crackling of our campfire and the distant sound of the river. Then it came a long, slow whistle that echoed through the trees. The sound was unlike anything I'd heard before, not quite human, not quite animal. Probably just the wind, Sarah suggested, but there was no wind that night. The trees stood perfectly still, their bare branches etched against the starlit sky like black veins. "Maybe it's someone with a whistle," Jake offered, but we all knew that made no sense. We were miles from the nearest campsite. The whistling continued, each note longer and slower than the last, until it suddenly stopped. We tried to laugh it off, turning the music back up and pouring more drinks. But something had changed. The forest felt different now, less empty, more watchful. Midnight approached and we lined up our fireworks along the riverbank. The first few were beautiful, bursting against the black sky in showers of color. That's when we heard it, a scream that turned my blood to ice. It wasn't a short, sharp scream of surprise or fear. This was continuous, primal, filled with something that might have been rage or pain or hunger. Maybe all 3. We froze, the half-empty bottle of tequila forgotten in my hand. The screaming continued, echoing off the trees until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Without a word, we all ran for our tents. I could hear the others' ragged breathing as we huddled inside, too terrified to speak. The screaming stopped, replaced by something worse: footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps crushing the frozen ground, coming closer to our campsite. Through the thin walls of our tent, I could see a shadow cast by our dying campfire. Something huge stood just outside our circle of tents. The figure was unnaturally tall, its proportions all wrong. It moved with a hunched, jerking motion like it wasn't used to walking upright. We held our breath, watching that shadow loom over us, hearing what sounded like sniffing deep animal inhalations as it moved from tent to tent. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The footsteps receded into the forest, accompanied by that same whistling sound, now faster, almost like a tune. None of us dared to leave our tents until the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. When we finally emerged, shaking and exhausted, we found massive footprints in the frost-covered ground. They started at the tree line, circled our tents, and led back into the forest. But there weren't any animal tracks I'd ever seen. They were almost human, but too large, too deep, with strange marks where toes should be. We packed up and left as quickly as we could, leaving half our supplies behind in our hurry. To this day, I've never gone camping again. Sometimes on quiet nights, I think I hear that whistling, that slow, deliberate sound that seems to carry a message I don't want to understand. The rational part of my mind tries to explain it away: a territorial animal, maybe a bear walking upright. But deep down, I know what we encountered that night was something else. Something that shouldn't exist. Something that chose to let us live. I still wonder about it, especially on New Year's Eve. Is it still out there in those woods, whistling its strange tune and waiting for more campers to stray far from civilization? And what would have happened if we'd stayed outside our tents that night, if we'd seen its face in the dying firelight? Some questions are better left unanswered. The cracking sound from the attic haunts me to this day. It wasn't the usual settling of an old house or the creak of wood expanding in the heat. No, this was the sound of someone trying very hard to be quiet and failing. It was New Year's Eve 2013, and I was hosting a party at my place. The living room buzzed with conversation and laughter, music playing just loud enough to dance to, but not so loud that people couldn't talk. Everything felt normal, comfortable, safe. The first warning came from Mike, who was standing near the center of the living room. He glanced up at the ceiling with a puzzled expression. "Hey Joe, what's that noise coming from up there?" I brushed it off. At first, houses make weird sounds, right? But then Sarah mentioned it too, and then Chris. Each time they asked, I felt a little knot of unease growing in my stomach. The attic was directly above the living room, and now that I was paying attention, I could hear it to a distinct sound of movement. I didn't want to alarm my guests, so I slipped away quietly, heading to the bedroom where the attic access was located. The pull-down ladder creaked as I lowered it, each sound seeming impossibly loud despite the music playing downstairs. I could hear my friends laughing below, completely unaware of what I was about to discover. The attic was dark, the air thick with that distinct musty smell of enclosed spaces. My phone's flashlight cast harsh shadows across the stored Christmas decorations and old furniture. The wooden boards creaked under my feet as I moved deeper into the space, past the water heater and stacks of boxes. That's when I heard it, a sharp, distinct crack from the far corner of the attic, right above the front door area. My heart nearly stopped. I knew that sound wasn't the house settling. Something or someone was up here with me. I swept my flashlight toward the sound, and that's when I saw them fingers wrapped around the edge of a large box. Human fingers. But the body they belonged to was hidden from view. A scream caught in my throat. For a moment, I convinced myself it had to be one of my friends playing a prank. "Hey," I called out, my voice shaking. "This isn't funny." Then the person moved, and all hope of this being a prank vanished. A man's face appeared from behind the box, middle-aged, unfamiliar, with an expression of barely contained rage. His eyes reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. I'm not sure if I screamed or not. All I remember is running faster than I've ever run in my life, nearly falling down the attic ladder in my panic. I burst into the living room, yelling for my friends. The music stopped. The party froze. My friend Mark took charge, organizing some of the guys to guard the attic access while we waited for the police. Those minutes felt like hours, standing there with makeshift weapons, listening to the occasional creak from above. When the police arrived, they found him easily enough. He was unarmed, they said. Just a man who had walked in during the party and made his way up to the attic. He claimed he meant no harm, but the look I'd seen in his eyes told a different story. The police said we were lucky. They'd seen cases like this before, people breaking it, hiding, waiting for everyone to leave or fall asleep. I try not to think about what might have happened if no one had noticed the sounds, if we'd all just written them off as the house settling. The man was arrested, but sometimes I still hear phantom creaks from my attic. I've checked it countless times since then, never finding anything but dust and old memories. Yet every New Year's Eve, when the house grows quiet after midnight, I find myself listening, straining to hear any sound that might be something more than just the settling of old wood. Because now I know that sometimes the monsters aren't in our imagination. Sometimes they're real people hiding in the dark spaces of our homes, waiting for the right moment. And sometimes the only thing that saves us is paying attention to those little sounds that seem so easy to dismiss. I've since installed better locks, security cameras, and motion sensors, but I still never feel completely safe in my own home. Because I know how easy it is for someone to slip in unnoticed during a moment of celebration when everyone's guard is down. And I know that somewhere out there, that man might be telling others about how easy it was to hide in my attic, waiting in the darkness above a room full of laughing, unsuspecting people,